Welcome back. All right, so I want to talk about a young player on each NHL team. I've done this in a kind of randomized order, so reverse alphabetical through one half and then forward through the alphabet the other way. At any rate, it starts with Winnipeg and ends with Nashville. So that being said, we go ahead and we start with Winnipeg, and we'll go through this. So in Winnipeg's case, I want to talk a little bit about Logan Stanley. Stanley's played 8 games, 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points. And I'm intentionally picking players who don't have a lot of points. I'm intentionally picking players who maybe are, under the radar a little bit. Logan Stanley, I think, right now with Winnipeg, might be the best he's looked in Winnipeg. Defenseman, it can take a little while longer. He's a big defenseman. It can take those big hulking defensemen a little bit longer, too. I think Stanley looks pretty good. So we'll see how long this lasts. Doesn't mean it lasts the whole season or anything like that, but so far I think so good for Logan Stanley. Anaheim. Trevor Zegras. Trevor Zegras has played 11 games, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points. And I think with Zegras now, I know everybody's in the comments of, the guy's a fraud and the guy sucks and yada yada. The reality is I think Zegras is playing okay. But again, for the amount of money he's paid, you need more points than this. So Anaheim's in an interesting position. I've talked about this for a while. And there were definitely Ducks fans who said, hey, the underlying numbers are good. He'll be fine as of last season. But this season, the offensive numbers just aren't there. It will be interesting to see if it keeps trending like this, what they do with Zegras, what they do with that contract, and whether or not he does end up being on the trade market at some point. I never really bought the trade rumors over the last couple of years with Zegras. I never really thought there was a lot to it, but at some point in time, again, if he doesn't start producing, there could be a little more to it. For Washington, Washington's got a pretty veteran lineup for the most part. So I'm going with Maxime Lapierre. Lapierre, 9 games and 1 assist. You may hear a scratching noise in the background. Bear's having fun because it's very windy out and there's leaves falling off the trees. Her absolute favorite thing in the world is leaves blowing around. So she's trying to bat them through the window. But yeah, Lapierre, 1 assist in 9 games. He's had a bit of a slow start to the season. The good thing for the Washington Capitals and for Lapierre as well is they've had a really strong start to the season. So Lapierre not necessarily producing the way that I think they had hoped. Like I said, she's batting at the window. It is kind of, I know, people are going to be like, why don't you just turn the camera on and forget the video? But no. So Lapierre, we'll see whether or not that offense shows up for him. But the way Washington's scoring, they can afford to keep him around and have him work through this, which I think can be to his benefit. Boston. So with Boston, I've talked about Boston in a video very, very recently, of course. And one thing I'm going to say is over the last couple of games, Poitras's looked pretty good. Now, in 11 games, he's got 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points. I don't know if Poitras's ever going to be a big point producer, but he could be a very good two-way forward. And he could end up being a very good center for the Boston Bruins. Maybe a third-line center kind, right? So for Poitras, there may be that upside too. Again, early last season, we were talking about comparisons between him and Bergeron, which isn't fair. I hate it when people do that, but it was there. You could see there were some parts of his game that felt very Bergeron-esque. So we'll see whether or not Poitras is able to get back to that type of level. But I think he's played well over the last few games, and I think he's trending in the right direction. Vegas. So during the summer, they picked up some players. And I felt that Holtz could be a really good pickup for them. Now, points-wise, he does have 5 points in 12 games. He just has the 1 goal. Holtz, his shot is too good for him to stay at that 1 goal for very long. And again, Holtz is in a situation where the team's playing well. He can work his way through this. And I still think with Holtz, you may very well get a 20-goal season out of him this year. It is Vegas. He may not get the opportunities he would have had with New Jersey last year in terms of ice time and certain playing situations. But he's a good young forward. And I just didn't see that Olofsson would get off to a strong start. He's quieted down a bit. And I don't think any of us saw the Stone-Eichel, just that combination being as good as it's been. So, yeah, Holtz, 5 points in 12 games, just the 1 goal. I think he's going to start scoring. Buffalo. So, I have been very much a fan of Jack Quinn. The problem is the numbers don't back it up so far this year. 11 games, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points. It's been quiet. And this is a Buffalo team that needs him to be kind of noisy offensively. So with Quinn, I do think he'll trend up at some point this season. I'm not sure when, though. That's the problem. Because, again, with young players, sometimes they just have really rough seasons. A couple years back, Cole Sillinger, just nothing was going in for him. Good example. I think, anyways, you guys can let me know if that's a good example. Terrible example, hockey guy. Where's that unsub button? But anyways, yeah, 2 points in 11 games for Jack Quinn. He's got to produce at a better rate than that, and I think he will. For Vancouver, so with Vancouver, I'm putting up Baines. 7 games, 1 goal. So Nils Amon clears waivers yesterday, thankfully. And because I want him down here in Abbotsford. He's a good player in Abbotsford, and I like that depth in the Vancouver organization. And so I've got Baines on the board because there is something there, and there is definitely that offensive upside there. I don't know how much potential there is at the NHL level, but it's been a good story. He's very popular locally. I do think Lekar-Mackey's going to get a shot at a scoring role with the Canucks before the season's done as well. That may negatively impact Baines' ice time, obviously. They may be fighting over a very similar role in the organization, but he's been good lately. He just has the 1 goal. I don't know if he's going to start producing at a good rate or not, but again, the effort's there, and that can sometimes be rewarded. Calgary. With Calgary, I'm going with one who may be a little bit older than some of the others on the board. And again, I'm just saying young players, not that they're, all the same age or anything, or just drafted over the last couple of years. Miromanov just has the 1 assist in 10 games so far. I'm surprised. After Miromanov came over from Las Vegas to Calgary, he had a really strong run at the end of the season, and I had kind of thought that would carry over to the start of this season from a points perspective. And so I'm surprised he only has the 1 assist, and he hasn't been very prominent either in Flames games. Like you hear his name, obviously, but in terms of, offensive plays and everything, Miromanov's name isn't as prominent as others. And so maybe this is just how it's going to be. He's going to have a very defensive season in terms of statistics. And, we'll see what his long-term future is, I would think, relatively soon. Everybody signs 8-year contracts, right? So eventually it's just going to be a given that no matter who it is, it could be a fourth liner. It's an 8-year deal. Why did I think of Lou Lamoriello when I said that? Anyways, Utah. For Utah, one of the recent call-ups, man, these are nowhere near the same size. These columns, I eyeballed this so poorly last night when I put them all up here. But Maverick Lamoureux, 5 games, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points. It's taken a little bit for Maverick to reach the NHL level, but it looks like it was worth the wait. He looks like a keeper. We'll see if the defensive game is enough to keep him in the lineup long term. But he's looked good. And this is a Utah team that needs defensemen right now. With the injuries to Marino and the injury, of course, as well to Durzi, they need Lamoureux to, find his game at the NHL level and play well. And so far, so good, I think, anyways. With the Carolina Hurricanes, I'm really hoping these are going to be short names in this part. I'm not sure if they will be or not. We'll have a good laugh. You'll have a good laugh if they're not going to fit. But Jack Drury will definitely fit in that part of the board. 10 games, 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points. I'm mildly surprised Drury doesn't have more points at this stage, especially with how Carolina's lighting up goaltenders. But that being said, he's playing more of a support role. I think he's on their 4th line. And so when injuries take place, Drury would be one that you could elevate in the lineup. So keep an eye on him. And again, if you're watching this from a fantasy perspective, and I'm trying to talk from a fantasy perspective a little bit, he might just be one to keep an eye on because the potential is there with Drury. You can see it in their games. With Toronto, okay, let me just make sure I can make this fit and it doesn't look like I'm squishing the letters at the end because I'm not. Robertson. So Robertson holds out over the summer, right? Doesn't want to stay in Toronto. That was the word anyways. And then he signs in Toronto and says he wants to stay. But he just has 1 goal in 11 games. He's been fighting it. And if this continues with Robertson for much longer, what do you do? If you're Toronto, do you keep him in the lineup and have him work through it? Because some markets you can do that and other markets can be Toronto where it can be really difficult to work through it. because it's always going to be in the press and it's always going to be everywhere. So I'll be interested to see what they do with Robertson. And if they use Robertson, maybe a team would have some interest in him, and maybe that could help fix some other part of the roster that they're looking at. So we'll see what they do. Keep in mind, Hawk and Paw should be back up with the team, by this coming weekend? Maybe from a cap perspective, they end up having to make a move. But yeah, Robertson, 11 games, just the 1 goal. Definitely one to keep an eye on, I think, as the season rolls along. Chicago, not a lot of young players in this lineup this year, which a lot of people talked about, but now you can see why. Their roster is definitely better. Reichel's actually had a pretty good start. 9 games, 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points. And he had a very nice helper last night against Anaheim. So I think Reichel's figuring this out. He's having a much better season so far than last season. And that might be where the veterans help. When you have a good veteran lineup out there, it can help with the kids. When you have a whole bunch of kids in the lineup, it can be difficult. Because you may not have that leadership. It's one thing that I wonder about with Buffalo, and I've talked about that before. That I sometimes feel like one more veteran forward could really help Buffalo and bring things together. And before anybody mentions Jack Skinner, because the last time I said it, somebody mentioned Skinner, I don't think Skinner being bought out and being off the team is why things are where they are with Buffalo right now. So, or Jeff Skinner, not Jack Skinner, Jeff Skinner. Skinner. Or Stuart Skinner, sure, why not? Goaltender, right? Okay, I have no idea where Jack came. Oh, because Jack Quinn. So we got Jack Quinn, right? Yeah, that's what that is. So I'll just call them all Jack, and then we'll be fine. Tampa Bay. Connor Geekie, at the time that he was acquired, everybody got focused on what was going the other way. Sergachev. In 12 games, Geekie has 2 goals and an assist for 3 points. He's been better than those 3 points. Connor Geekie has really good offensive instincts, and I think that he's one to keep an eye on as the season goes along because eventually he's going to get a chance to move up the lineup due to an injury, or he's just going to force his way up the lineup because of his talent level. Either way, I think Geekie, really smart pickup, and you get Mosier as well. So it's not like they lose Sergachev and they downgraded the blue line a lot. Mosier is not Sergachev, but he's still a pretty good defenseman. And getting Geekie, I think that trade kind of worked out a little bit pretty well for both teams, really. Colorado. With Colorado, one of the saddest stories of the year is that Ivan went to Ivan. So now he's Ivan. My fun of Ivan is gone because my wife's first name is Yvonne. But in 12 games, he has 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points. And I think with each passing game, he looks more comfortable in the NHL. I feel like there are still mistakes here and there. Absolutely there are. But I think there's something there with him. And it's interesting, too, because initially I was more curious because of the name. And I thought it was kind of funny. He had the same first name and last name. But he does look like he's going to be a pretty useful bottom 6 forward for Colorado. And there might be a little bit more scoring there as time goes by. Again, he's got 2 goals in 12 games, which isn't bad considering the ice time and all that. So, one to keep an eye on. St. Louis, not a lot of young players, and this is going to be tough to make fit. So, I'm going to go quieter, as if that helps. Jake Neighbors, 12 games, 4 goals, 1 assist, 5 points. Neighbors is going to be a guy who's always crashing the net. He's always going to be able to get those tip shots into the net. I do think that Jake Neighbors will be a good goal producer. He may be one of those guys who's always getting goals and his assists will be less than his goals. So if you're looking at it from a points perspective, again, playing fantasy, he may never be a big points producer. But if you're in a fantasy league that rewards goals more than it does, say, assists or, favors goals over points and all that, and I know there's various leagues that work various ways, Neighbors may be very valuable if your league really values the goals. So I do think that while his shooting percentage last year isn't sustainable, he's still an excellent forward. He'll get it all figured out. Columbus. Okay, let me just make sure I write this correctly first before I try saying it. Because with Putia, what's interesting is that I've messed up the way his name's pronounced a couple of times. And there are still, every now and then, there's times where I look at his name and I go, no. It's like Jack-Eye that way, where you're like, really? But although Jack-Eye, once you say it and you look, you go, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Pudia has 1 goal in 11 games. He's been pretty prominent, though, for Columbus. I do think that he's been more prominent than 1 point in 11 games would tell you. And so we'll see if that offense ends up showing up for him with Columbus at some point in the form of more points. But I do think the 1.11 game, like I was surprised seeing that. So that's why he's on the board, because I really thought he would have had more than that. Seattle. On the Seattle side, and we've talked about this guy, it feels like for 3 years. This is the third season we're talking about Shane Wright. Shane Wright, 13 games, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points. I'm going to be honest. I don't know if Shane Wright is ever going to be a good, solid point-producing forward in the NHL. He's a good bottom six forward for Seattle. He makes some good plays. I don't know that I see that number one. Like he was rated number 1 in his draft class the year before he's drafted, and of course famously drops down and Seattle grabs him as soon as they can. But I don't think that at this point in time him dropping in the draft has been disproven. If anything, it's been shown why he dropped in the draft. So he's taking a regular shift with Seattle this year. He's still very young, so there's the possibility that Wright does develop into a really good offensive player. I just don't see the same signs with him that I saw with, say, Lafreniere or with Slavkovsky before they broke through, or Jack Hughes. I haven't been seeing that with Shane Wright. So maybe it's because he's playing further down the lineup. So maybe it's a development/coaching thing. But either way, Shane Wright is on the board, and I don't know what kind of offensive numbers we're going to get from him in years to come. For Dallas... So with Dallas, I'm going to go with one who's been on the board a few times, at least once already this season, and a few times over the summer too. But Wyatt Johnston in 11 games, 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points. He should have goals. But right now he has goal because he just singular, right? 1 goal. He's an excellent young player. He'll figure it out. This may very well just be that sophomore jinx, which is a thing. The sophomore jinx is absolutely a thing. And I think that's part of what's going on with Johnston. Again, Johnston's in a situation where the team's record's pretty strong, so the fact that he hasn't been as productive as expected hasn't really stood out too much. I haven't heard a lot of criticism of Wyatt either, so at this point in time, he's just working his way through it. San Jose, sadly, I can't talk about Celebrini. They're also a team that's got some young guys that are not in the lineup, that they're giving their time at lower levels before putting him on the Sharks. So we'll talk about Will Smith. 2 goals in 10 games, and through the first, I'd say, half dozen games, he kind of looked lost. He kind of looked lost, a bit overwhelmed, and I was very concerned that Will Smith was not in a situation where he was necessarily going to have a lot of success. And I was very concerned that this might hurt his development. Then he gets a couple of goals in a game this past week. And he's looked pretty good over the last 4 games in general, so... I guess he's figuring it out and might be one of those ones who could start producing some points at the NHL level. Detroit. So Detroit recently brought up Marco Casper. Casper's been kind of, slow burning his way onto the roster. They've done a slow burn with his... You guys know what I mean. So Casper with the 1 assist in 7 games, that first goal's coming. He's had opportunities lately. I think he's getting more comfortable at the NHL level with each passing game. And it's interesting too, because his AHL stats last year were okay. They weren't necessarily fantastic. But at the NHL level, I think he looks comfortable, and we'll see how things go for him the rest of the way. But that first goal has to be, I would say in the next week, he should get that first goal. Yeah. Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is not a team that has a ton of young players either, so let's just go ahead and talk about Rutger McGroarty for a moment here. Just played the 3 games before he got sent to the AHL, 0 points, which led to a bunch of people dunking on him and, the guy sucks. And the reality is he's a young player, and jumping to the NHL, it's not easy. It is very difficult, and I think the interesting thing is that often players have trouble with the speed of the game, and they underestimate the speed of the game, and I think that happens with almost anybody joining the NHL at the beginning. Might be what part of it was with McGroarty. He could very well end up back up with the team. If the team falls apart, do you put McGroarty in the lineup knowing you're not going to make the playoffs anyways and just let him go through the motions? Or do you keep him in Wilkes-Barre and keep him out of that situation where it might feel kind of negative? It'll be interesting to see what Kyle Dubas does. But Yeah, McGroarty, I still think is going to be a very good forward at the NHL level, and I'm not necessarily declaring Winnipeg the winners of that trade at this time. All right, so let's move on to Edmonton. With Edmonton, a former Vancouver Canuck goes on the board here. So Vasily Podkolzin, there was a lot of people upset in Vancouver when he was traded. In 12 games with the Oilers, he has 3 assists. I think he's playing a really good role with the Oilers. I think his fourth line role has been good. He's a good forechecker. He reinvented himself a bit in the Vancouver organization prior to his exit, and I think he's been a really good addition for the Oilers. Obviously, he's not waivers exempt, which is part of the reason why the Vancouver Canucks moved him. I don't think they envisioned him as necessarily being part of their regular roster, so they move him to a lineup where he gets to play, and Podkolzin, I think, looked all right. So I don't know if he is ever going to be a guy who gets to 20-plus goals or anything, but the effort is there. The hitting is there, and he seems to fit in just fine with Edmonton's system. Philadelphia. And I almost picked Michkov, and then I thought, no. We've talked about Michkov a lot. I want to talk about Emil Andre. So, in the World Juniors, I noticed Emil Andre. Loved his game. And the comment that I saw often from people was, he's a good defenseman, but he's too small to play in the NHL. At that size, he's not going to be an NHL regular. Now, this season, he's played 4 games since a recall from Philadelphia, or since a recall from the Phantoms. 1 assist. And I think he's looked good. I do. I think Andre's looked good. It doesn't mean that he's overcoming his size yet, but I think Emil Andre's been a good, not necessarily a surprise, but a bit of a revelation for Philadelphia, sure. And I think he's got a good future. So, in the event that he overcomes his size and becomes an NHL regular, I think that'll be great. So hopefully we do see that from Emil Andre. Sorry, all those leaves got Bear all excited, so I've had to put her out until I'm done this video. She's just not going to stop running around and whatever. Anyways, so Emil Andre, 1 assist in 4 games. Cats. And so we'll move on to Florida. Florida, of course, not awash in a lot of young players, but Samoskevich has looked pretty good. 13 games, 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points. And offensively, he's started to figure this out. That end-to-end goal for his first ever NHL goal, pretty darn amazing. And then he follows it up with a pretty nice goal, I believe, on a net drive in the next game, or a couple games later. What are days? I don't know. Ever since 2020, all the days just blend together. It's just mush. But yeah, Samoskevich has been quite good. And hopefully I learn to be able to deliver that name in a way where it doesn't sound like I'm checking how I say it, because I absolutely am. But yeah, for a Florida team that already has a lot of depth and a lot of good young talent, young-ish talent too, guys in their prime, here's another forward coming along who could be excellent. Ottawa. For Ottawa, and this is part of the reason I wanted to do this video, because I haven't talked about Tyler Kleven. 11 games, 0 goals, 1 assist. So not a lot to talk about offensively, but he's looked pretty good lately for Ottawa as well, I think. And I always throw in the I think at the end, because there's always going to be people who disagree with me on players that I think are having a good start to the season, even if the numbers won't back it up. But I don't think Kleven's looked out of place in that Ottawa lineup. Good top 6 defenseman. I think Bernard Dockers had a pretty good start this season too. Remember, he cleared waivers last year. So, yeah, Kleven I think is going to play the whole season in Ottawa, as long as there's no injuries or anything. And, I think there should be an upswing in his production a little bit. Probably not a lot, but defensemen, it could take them a little bit longer before they start producing at the NHL level. For the LA Kings, it's not that long ago we were discussing whether or not Turcotte would ever play in the NHL due to injury. Whether he'd ever have a long enough run where he was healthy to actually, get there in his development. So in 12 games, he has 1 goal, 4 assists, 5 points. The offense hasn't been, huge for him, but I think the fact that he's played every game for LA says a lot about his development. And the 5 points in 12 games, that's not bad. The production's not bad. And I think the goals will come. So for Turcotte, He may be one of those players that, again, doesn't reach the expectations that were set upon him when he was drafted, but still ends up being a pretty useful NHL player, and that's definitely got some value to it. But this is an era where either you're an awesome superstar or you're nothing. I've noticed that lately, that, players will become pretty good players and people will still be like, yeah, but he kind of sucks, though. He doesn't, but anyway. So Turcotte for the LA Kings. New York Rangers. Another good story I haven't had a chance to talk about. I like it when a guy comes out of nowhere to make a roster and then sticks. 9 games, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points for Mancini. What a great name for a New York Ranger, Mancini. It's just perfect. I don't know that you could put Mancini on any other team and that it will work as well. Okay, maybe Jersey. Maybe it works well in Jersey, right? But at any rate, Mancini's been good for the Rangers. 9 games, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points. He's got a good plus-minus as well. And he's fit right in. So, I don't see any reason why he doesn't spend the whole season with the Rangers. And, it's been something to watch. Because going into the season, I know I did not have him. I don't think I had him on the depth chart for the Rangers for the season preview I did. So, yeah, he definitely came out of nowhere, and at least nowhere to some of us. But it's been a good story so far for him. Minnesota. Okay. Let me just write the name first. Kuznetsov. So 11 games for Kuznetsov, no goals, 2 assists. Before the season, I did talk about how I liked the offense from Kuznetsov, and I thought there was a lot of potential for him to move up the lineup. So far, that has not been realized. And he is in a situation where Minnesota's playing really well. He is playing bottom 6 minutes. So it's not a big deal that he's not producing yet. I still think there's going to be a point in time where that production increases a lot for Kuznetsov. I'm not sure when that necessarily takes place, but I do think that at some point he will get that opportunity to play more minutes. And I think he'll seize that opportunity, and I think he'll do pretty well. So definitely one, I think, to keep an eye on. Let me know your thoughts. New York Islanders. Youth in the New York Islanders lineup. I almost feel like I could put up like Nelson or like Cizikas and say this is a young player for Lou Lamoriello. So that leaves me with an option of Dobson. Dobson's had a really good run so far this season from a points perspective. So 12 games and 6 assists. No goals yet, but Dobson's never going to be a big goal producer. I don't think he will be. But I think he's going to be a very good setup man throughout his career. He'll be one of those defensemen that gets like about 10 goals and about 55, 60 assists. It just feels like that's how it's going to be throughout his career. That he's going to be a big point producer, just not necessarily the guy with that booming shot from the point that gets a lot of consideration. And it does mean that when you get into the Norris discussions, it might be more difficult for him to get into the conversation if most of his points are via assists. If a vast majority of his points are via assists, because almost every player's majority of points are via assists. People who watch the channel know what I mean, right? Anyways, all right, that being said, let's move on to Montreal. Montreal. So another interesting talking point that I wanted to bring up here is Barron. So 8 games, 1 goal, no assists, just the 1 point so far. It's a crowded blue line in Montreal. And when everybody's healthy, is Barron going to be a regular for the Montreal Canadiens? Now, of course, when I say to Montreal fans, when everybody's healthy, you may laugh at that idea, but eventually you would think everybody does get healthy. But I do think with the number of young defensemen they have, we've already seen them move Harris because I guess they just didn't see a spot for him in the lineup, which is fair. So is Barron going to be in that situation too? Because it feels like he's been passed on the depth chart by guys like Hudson, by Mailloux, and there's others as well that are knocking on that door. Eventually, Reinbacher's going to be in the lineup too. There may not be enough room for a guy like Barron. So I haven't seen with Justin Barron a lot to tell me that he's going to be a really good top 4 defenseman for Montreal at this point. I'm not as sold on Barron now as I was when he first debuted in the NHL. So you guys can decide on that, how you feel about that. But yeah, Barron, is there going to be room for him in the Montreal lineup? And do you move him? Do you move him for a forward? And what kind of return would you get for Barron at this point? What would his market value be? New Jersey. So I'm not one that's shying away from defending players. I try to be as positive as possible. Luke Hughes has 1 assist in 5 games, and when he was out, I kept seeing people going, New Jersey will be better off without Luke Hughes because defensively the guy sucks. He's very young. He's got 1 year of NHL experience. Most young defensemen will struggle defensively in the NHL when they first come in. That happens a lot. There are so many instances of this. And dating back 40 plus years, I have heard hockey fans saying this defenseman sucks when they're very young. With Luke Hughes, he has a tremendous amount of ability. And if the Devils and their fans decide, the guy sucks, I would gladly welcome him to any team I root for. Absolutely no questions asked. I think Luke Hughes is going to be fantastic. It took a little while for Jack Hughes to get it figured out at the NHL level. Quinn Hughes defensively was a nightmare when he joined the Vancouver Canucks. Is much better now. And I think Luke Hughes is going to get there too. And so people who are, complaining about his defense, a couple years from now, I think those complaints will drop off. And so we end with Nashville. And with Nashville, one of their recent call-ups, another defenseman here too. Former first-round draft pick, Laro. Laro has played 6 games so far in Nashville, 2 assists. And Nashville is known for drafting defensemen, developing defensemen, and then becoming pretty darn good. Laro looks like he's going to be another example of that. Nashville's ability to develop defensemen is, I think, amongst the best organizations in the league. I haven't done any scientific research on that. It's just over the years we've watched as many young defensemen have come up and ended up being really, really good for Nashville. I could probably do a video on that, to be honest, because there's a lot. And I could do a video and just talk about, which organizations are good at developing defensemen and maybe even when. See, 32-team video, and I'm getting ideas for another video that I may do at a later time. So there you go. But let me know your thoughts regarding these players. And I try to be as positive as possible because I understand that very often there's a lot of negativity, that it's easier to drive views towards content where you're slamming a player or a team or talking about how stupid a general manager is. But I prefer to talk about the upside. So what kind of upside do you see with the players on the board? Which ones of these players do you think are going to end up developing into star players or at least very, very good NHLers? And which ones do you think, a couple years from now, they may very well be out of the league? That's one of those things with young players. It can go either way. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.